Hey everyone, Harris O'Malley from DrNerdLove.com, and today it's time to ask the question, are men okay? No, for real. This started out as just a clickbaity episode title because of recent events that I'll get into in a second, but over the last couple of days, you kinda honestly have to wonder. I mean, it's telling that when a company that sells razors and razor blades makes an ad challenging men to be better men, guys react like they were told that Procter & Gamble was coming over to their house to lop their dicks off. But for whatever reason, telling men that men can do better and it's good to be kind seems to make a particular subset of men explode with all of the tact and nuance of a He-Man villain.
I am not nice, I am not kind, and I am not wonderful.
This was never more in evidence than in the reaction to proposed changes to guidelines that are designed to help men receive better mental health care. Last week, the American Psychological Association released new guidelines, 10 guidelines in all, that are designed to help psychologists, psychiatrists, and therapists and clinicians better address the very real mental health issues that men and boys face, and the consequences that result from those issues, because it really can be hard to be a man. We are in a position of privilege and influence in society, but that position also comes with severe restrictions in what it means to be a man. These expected societal and systematic roles box men in and bring levels of stress and anxiety that are often never treated properly. And that goes beyond a simple case of needing to talk about their feelings. As the new guide itself notes, boys and men receive harsh discipline such as suspension and expulsion from school at higher rates than girls. Boys, particularly African American and Latino boys, drop out of high school at higher rates than girls and are less likely to graduate from college. Men on the whole face greater physical health problems such as cardiovascular disease, public health concerns such as substance abuse and incarceration, and a wide variety of other quality of life issues like an inability to foster and maintain familial relationships and basic emotional well-being. So you would think that people would want to help boys and men do better, but they don't. The formation of these guidelines isn't terribly unusual in and of itself. In 2007, they released their Guidelines for the Psychological Practice for Girls and Women, as well as Guidelines for LGBT individuals in 2011, and Guides for Ethnic and Religious Minorities, and even Senior Citizens. For the most part, these are fairly non-controversial, and each one was released to the relative disinterest from the public at large. And so it was with the Guidelines for Psychological Practice with Boys and Men. Men's rights groups applauded the APA for creating specific guidelines to help address the gaps in psychological counseling and healthcare that lead to men being 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide, as well as a life expectancy that's nearly 5 years shorter than women's. Those who disagreed with the guidelines were methodical and deliberate and thoughtful in their discussion, citing specific instances where they felt the APA's methodology didn't reflect the results described and were able to suggest alternate solutions instead. Nah, I'm f***ing with you. The MRAs completely lost their over this. The response from men's rights advocates and various other, almost entirely right-wing individuals has ranged from the standard nuh-uh and no you to the increasingly overblown reactions that range from accusing the APA from endangering boys to ending marriage as we know it. I mean, I guess if you aren't a defender of traditional marriage, you could be forgiven for not realizing that by suggesting that expressing distress through violence, that bottling up your emotions, and being unwilling to go to the doctor are all, in fact, bad for you, you are actually encouraging the downfall of holy matrimony and hastening the demise of Western civilization as we know it. The general reception by the right wing and MRA groups tends to rely on the repetition of the same tired cliches, that the APA is declaring gender to be toxic and being male to be a pathology, except for the part where it says nothing of the kind. In fact, part of the motivating force behind the development and publication of these guidelines was the fact that many men experience gender bias in their therapy, which would keep them from getting the proper diagnosis and treatment. Consider that men men are almost 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women are. Because of cultural biases surrounding men and masculinity, not only are men less likely to seek out help for issues like depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, but we're socialized to externalize our emotional issues. Many men with drinking or substance abuse problems or anger management issues are often reacting to problems like depression. And because of gendered stereotypes, they're getting diagnosed for what are essentially the symptoms and not the disease. And the fact that young boys tend to externalize emotional distress may also be causing teachers and counselors to miss real mental health problems and diagnose them as having ADHD instead. Those same biases also mean that men are less likely to get effective help or treatment for the trauma resulting from sexual abuse, and it contributes to the lack of resources for men who want to leave abusive relationships. For that matter, the guidelines never suggest that being male is bad or that masculinity is harmful. Far from being men are bad, these guidelines specifically bring attention to the fact that there are many different masculine ideologies, and it reflects on how these ideologies intersect with issues surrounding race, sexuality, and social class. This has been a long-running issue when it comes to men's health, especially men's psychological and emotional health. The majority of psychological studies focused almost entirely on straight, cisgendered white men and boys, ignoring the ways that sexuality and race might affect gay men or men of color. After all, an upper-class African-American man is going to experience and perform masculinity differently than a poor gay or trans Latino boy, or a young middle-class Asian man. But while there are many different ways that men express gender, there is a specific masculine ideology that affects a significant portion of Western men in general and American men in particular. An ideology that includes anti-femininity, dominance, aggression, hypersexuality, violence, and the eschewal of all appearance of weakness. All qualities of toxic forms of masculinity that I've covered in previous episodes. And far from being a blanket condemnation of all forms of traditional masculinity, the guidelines emphasize encouraging and building on pro-social masculine behaviors, which includes understanding the right context for the right behavior. In fact, Dr. Ryan McDermott, who helped draft the guidelines, specifically points out that traits like stoicism, aggression, and self-sacrifice can not only be valuable, but vital in the right context. But while these are traits that help, say, soldiers survive on a battlefield, those same traits can be destructive in a home environment and ruin your romantic or familial relationships. But it's unsurprising that the most vociferous critics will admit that they're giving their opinions without having actually read the document, because they have a vested interest in not changing. It's par for the course for MRAs and right-wing pundits to react with outside, one might even say hysterical, indignation to anyone who looks at them cross-eyed. You would think that these stalwart defenders of masculine ideals would react as their manly credo would tell them to. The logical and stoic response would be to remain unreactive, ignoring the story, and continuing on with life, unbothered by the surely irrelevant opinions of others, and secure in the knowledge that this too shall pass. Instead, what we get is a Russian nesting doll of Chicken Littles quote-tweeting other Chicken Littles who are only too proud to admit they haven't actually read any of the guidelines, but they have to warn you anyway that this is a threat that could end masculinity as we know it. Ironic, considering how strong and manly they're supposed to be. One might be forgiven for thinking that their sense of manhood was a wee bit, fragile. Also, gentlemen, stoicism is about understanding that adversity is temporary and your emotional state is transitory, not learning how to be an asshole Vulcan. The standard response to anyone questioning these tenets is to insist that there is no problem at all, or if that there is a problem, then the only answer is to try to man even harder, and if it's hurting you, then you're just not manning hard enough. It doesn't matter that doing this damages you or that it hurts other people. After all, the traditional framework and ideology they're promoting is linked to transphobia, homophobia, and bullying. It's what their parents taught them, and hey, they turned out just fine. I mean, if you consider being someone who thinks that emotional repression, bullying, violence, gender policing, and misogyny to be fine. The truth is that the various MRAs and right-wingers who want to argue about this aren't arguing in good faith. The majority of them are grifters and outrage merchants, trying to leverage a social media ecosystem that rewards ginning up false indignation by equating any reaction as engagement. The madder you are, the more page views they get, and that means they have more opportunities to reassure you that you too can destroy your enemies if you just keep listening to them. And if any of this is really bothering you, then all you need to do is buy another bottle of Brain Force, now with extra soy. So they rely on the echo chamber of YouTube channels and bot-enhanced Twitter accounts to develop a funhouse mirror version of these guidelines that is less about what these guidelines say and more about the mentality of people who share the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez memes as a substitute for having an informed political opinion. The remainder of these people don't actually give a shit about men. While they love to quote statistics about the fact that men make up approximately 93% of the population in state and federal prisons and represent approximately 77% of homicide victims, whenever they're faced with a suggestion about how to improve these issues, they will immediately retreat to the idea that there is nothing wrong with men and boys will be boys. The only time that they care about the plight of men is if they can use it to argue about whether men or women have it worse. And the saddest part is that occasionally they will tiptoe right up to the edge of having an actual honest-to-God epiphany before deciding that actually examining their beliefs would require to accept that maybe they've been backing the wrong horse all this time. Because here's the thing, for all the folks out there who say that being a man is hard, they're absolutely right. In a very real way, men are struggling. There are conflicts that come with being a man in today's society. That's literally what these guidelines are about. Not only is it for helping men, but it's for helping therapists better understand men's issues. A lot of therapists, for example, aren't necessarily familiar with, say, military culture and social norms, as well as the common mental health issues that military veterans face. And that can make it hard to help a veteran who's having a hard time in civilian life. These guidelines specifically reference the need to make it easier for police and first responders to seek out help after facing traumatic events and when they're dealing with caregiver burnout. For that matter, these guidelines stress the need for understanding the stress that can come for African American, Latino, and Asian men trying to remain stoic and unreactive in the face of systematic racism. Stress that ultimately damages their health and leads to physical issues like hypertension and coronary failure. It's pretty obvious who has or hasn't read these guidelines, or even the article from the APA announcing them, because there's nothing in those guidelines that even the most dedicated MRA can plausibly claim pathologizes masculinity or insists that men need to, I don't know, take up knitting. Though, honestly, dudes, knitting is just straight up engineering with yarn. It's all about addressing the ways that men are literally being hurt by trying to be real men. And not just in a talking about your feelings kind of way, but in a real men don't go to the doctor way. The way that leads to men dying younger than women. The way that leads to men killing themselves. But none of the usual suspects want to talk about any of that. They don't want to talk about the fact that society has changed and that we've come to understand that things we once thought were good are in fact harmful. They don't want to talk about the fact that we as a society have sold masculinity as a product that men would be rewarded for buying into, and that those rewards just aren't coming. Certainly not in the way that we were told to expect or in the way that we want. And we don't want to talk about the damage that trying to live these narrow roles causes to men and boys. Instead, they want people to feel threatened by this. They want men to be afraid, because men who feel the most threatened and the most afraid of all this will get angry and they'll push back. You can see it in the reactions to the APA suggested guidelines to help men. And you can see it in the comments and replies from people who are getting angry about a commercial that lays out the lightest and most anodyne criticism of traditional masculinity possible. And you'll see it in the comments on this episode. Count up the number of times that soy boy, cuck, mangina, or any of the usual insults crop up. Because that anger, that discomfort, that need to lash out, that's toxic masculinity. That is literally what the APA is trying to help with. It's an acknowledgement that life can be tough for men, that men are hurting. It is a recognition that we need to quit encouraging and excusing bad behavior. It's understanding that we don't need to buy into a system that actively hurts us. It's not saying that masculinity is a mental illness. It's recognizing that we have been failing men. Men have the capacity, the potential, and the strength to be better. But if, and only if, we are willing to rise up and take up that challenge. Hey, thanks for checking out the latest video. So, you've heard from me, now I want to hear from you. How do you define your masculinity? What are some of your struggles with being a man? Share your story in the comments below. I can't wait to read them. I know my audience can't wait to read them either. Meanwhile, still taking your questions for the Nerd Love Line special. It's probably coming out this February. I promise we're coming up with a better name for it. So if you've got a short dating question you'd like to have answered on here, then call it in to 512-522-6513 and leave a voicemail. Or you can record it on your end and send the audio file to doc@drnerdlove.com and put "for YouTube" in the subject. Meanwhile, if you are terrified of texting, if you are daunted by DMs, if you freak out when you call someone on the phone and they actually pick up, then you need my new book, I Got Her Number, Now What? This is the textbook you have always wanted for taking numbers and turning them into dates. It will turn texting from something you dread into your dating superpower and turn your phone into a date ATM. Links to buy it are in the show notes, so go check it out. And if you do check it out, then do me a huge solid and be sure to review it on Amazon and Goodreads. It's a huge help. If you're digging the series and you know what to do, hit that thumbs up, let me know, be sure to share it around with all your friends. But if you are really enjoying these videos, and I mean you are really enjoying them, if you feel like you're getting a lot out of it, you're finding that it's helping you, and you want to support the channel, especially with some of the really exciting new programs that I'm working on, then consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/drnerdlove. Even $1 is a huge help, but starting at $3 a month or more, you get access to some incredible patron-only bonus content. Meanwhile, you can follow me on Twitter at @DrNerdLove. Keep up with the latest news by joining the Facebook page at facebook.com/drnerdlove. And as always, hit that logo to subscribe, check out my other videos, and I will see you here next time with more about love, sex, and dating. Later.